Hey, welcome to week 4, office hours. I'm sorry, week 3. Gotta make sure I'm on my right week. Lance Sexton's Coleman's 2015 certified SBA 7A loan liquidation training. Lance, how are you doing?
I'm good. My eye is 95%. Well, something's not good. Sorry, guys.
Your staff is barking at you.
Hang on one second.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You know the drill. If you want to ask a question, you can shoot it over to us. We hope you're enjoying the training as much as we're putting it together. Why don't we go to a poll question, Joseph? Lance is doing that.
Oh, you know, Bob, I was waiting for the time when that would happen during a broadcast, and it finally did.
Finally did. Well, it's okay. We have some poll questions. Number 1, when do you normally submit your CPC care and preservation of collateral expense tabs? With the purchase demand kit, with the wrap-up report. We don't need no stinking CPC tabs.
Yeah, I'm just curious, Bob, when they're actually doing it, the 2 times that you can do it are with your purchase demand and wrap-up. But one thing that I've found in working some liquidation cases, that they had attempted to send in their PDK and CPC expense tabs and were not successful, but in that one particular instance, I actually found a PDK where they had some expenses and they'd never submitted their CPC expenses, and we did it 5 years after the fact.
Lance, 25% do it with the PDK, the other 75% do it with the wrap-up report. What's your recommendation?
Actually, Bob, I like doing it with the wrap-up report because, and either's fine. Either is fine. I don't want anybody to feel like if you're doing it with the PDK, there's any problems with that. I like doing it with the wrap-up report because all of your expenses are in, and you have a better opportunity to give a comprehensive set of expenses to the SBA.
Question number 2. Have you ever had legal expenses declined by the United States Small Business Administration?
And just curious about, you know, Bob, my poll questions quite often come from what I'm working on right now. And I have
How prevalent is it? What percentage of the time will SBA decline a legal expense?
Well, Bob, if you follow the SOP, never. But, you know, if you get your litigation plan approved, and if your expenses run more than you projected, send in an amended plan. You shouldn't have a problem getting those expenses approved. But like I was saying earlier, I like the poll questions quite often come from something I'm working on right now. And I have another old project, liquidation project, where they ran up significant liquidation expenses or litigation expenses and never had a litigation plan approved. So, and they had taken these off the top of recoveries, and what's going to happen to this bank is once SBA processes the purchase demand kit, they're actually going to turn around and send a bill back to the bank for those legal expenses they took out.
Lance, 83% have never had that fun experience.
Good, good.
Question number 3, what is the typical size of a litigation budget related to the liquidation of one of your SBA loans? 5 to 10, over 10. I assume this is also colored by geography.
And that is an absolute. I find that most of your Northeast, East Coast banks and Florida banks, Georgia banks, and California banks tend to have larger litigation budgets.
No one is over 10,000. 80% are between 5 and 10. Does that surprise you?
Not really. It really doesn't.
I think we have one. I'm sorry, go ahead, Lance.
Well, I mean, most of the litigation involved with SBA loans tends to just be a simple foreclosure. And depending on your geographic area, now, if you're in Florida or if you're in California, I'm surprised you're not having budgets because I've never had a litigation budget in Florida or California under 10.
Right. Yeah. What is your most typical recoverable expense on the SBA loan liquidation? Litigation, CPC, property taxes, forced placed insurance?
Just out of curiosity, I was working a CPC expense package for a bank Monday, and it kind of caught me by surprise, but the two most significant expenses, well, the most significant expense was the unpaid property taxes.
Yeah. Let's see, we got 60% litigation. I would expect that 20% CPC, 0 property tax, and 20% are in the insurance bucket. Lance, what's the takeaway you want everyone to know from week 3?
Well, I just think it's important. We even covered it in one of the poll questions. Your legal expenses, you can be reimbursed on those. And the important part of getting reimbursed is making sure you have the appropriate SBA approval on your litigation plan, accounting for those expenses properly, and then submitting them with the CPC expense tabs at the time of the purchase demand kit or wrap-up report.
I mean, this is really just pay attention to the knitting and dot the T's and cross the I's.
Absolutely, but you'd be surprised how many banks do not get approval of some of the recoverable expenses because they don't account for them properly, or in some cases, when they need approval, they don't get that approval.
We appreciate the questions. I love the questions. Email question number 1. In my state, property tax certificates are issued each year but must be held 2 years after purchase before a tax foreclosure sale can occur. The certificates earn interest and penalties during this period. If I put a loan into liquidation, I understand our advancing the property taxes would be a reimbursable expense, but would the interest on the property taxes be reimbursable? Also, if we choose to not pay the taxes until we obtain title to the property, which may be a year later?
This is a great question, and I have several active liquidation cases I'm working where there are some past due property expenses, and I think there are different actions that you would take as a prudent lender depending on the state you're in. Just because the property taxes are past due, if I'm making an estimate of the time frame of liquidation and we're not going to potentially see a tax sale, that's what you want to avoid. You want to avoid the tax sale. And I had a circumstance where they had just gotten past due for 1 year, and I talked to the tax collector, and I asked the tax collector, I said, at what point would you push this to a tax sale? And they said, once it's 2 years past due on the property taxes, then we actually start the process, and it'd take us about 12 months. Well, we're in process of foreclosure about 3 months away from taking possession of the property, so we went ahead and foreclosed, took care of the property tax issue at that time. So it's a good question, and part of the question was, can you be reimbursed for those interest and penalties that may occur? It's not actually covered in the SOP. I looked very closely after getting this question. From my practical experience, I have been reimbursed or had approved property taxes plus penalties and interest on a liquidation case. And so I think yes is the answer. You should be able to get reimbursed for those.
Great, thank you. Very, very.
But avoid the tax sale at all costs.
Sure. Lance, this was actually a question from the webinar we did, but I thought it would be important for this group because a lot of times they're going to have to go back and clean up what closers didn't do. And here we have a question on equity injection. I was wondering if you could tell me what SBA requires to evidence borrower's equity injection into a property when it's a piece of property. And your answer is?
Well, you're going to want a copy of a current appraisal. When you're in the liquidation phase, typically the appraisal that you'll have in file will have a little age on it. So I always recommend once you put a loan into liquidation, and if you have an appraisal that's more than a year old, it's time to go ahead and order a liquidation appraisal. But you're going to take the as-is value, well, as a liquidator, Bob, this has a different answer. But as a liquidator, you're going to take the as-is value from the liquidation appraisal, and you're going to deduct the senior liens that existed at the time of the closing of the loan to determine the equity injection value that property would have.
Right.
When you're closing the loan, you're going to take that current appraisal you did in the underwriting process, use the as-is value, and deduct any senior liens that may exist. And you're going to want evidence of those senior liens, and a payoff statement would be fine from the bank that holds that senior lien.
Lance, unfortunately, a lot of the people on the call in your class have to clean up documentation issues. Here we have one. We don't have the 1919. What are the chances of collecting from the SBA on the guarantee if I don't have the 1919, the borrower's information form from which the loan underwriter and loan closer are to base the construction of the loan file?
Well, Bob, a mistake that so many banks make when they get in the liquidation process, they take a look at the loan file and they find out their closers blew it, and there's documentation missing. And a number of banks, Bob, will put the project down at that point and say, throw their hands up and say, we can't do anything about it. I spend half my time. I had one yesterday. We found out we were getting paid yesterday, but I had a purchase demand kit that I submitted actually 2 weeks ago, and we got paid yesterday. But, Bob, it was missing the 4506Ts, the transcripts, and the reconciliation. And the workaround that I know will work there, if they can complete and get the borrower's signature on the 4506T at that time, and then attach copies of 3 years of accountant-prepared tax returns. It doesn't work 100% of the time. It depends on who you get, but it worked in this particular instance, and the bank got paid. In this case, your 1919 should have been collected from the borrower at the time of origination. However, you as liquidators, if you get a project and there's no 1919, and 1920 in particular, Bob, the 1920, the banker's form, you can absolutely recreate that for liquidation. If you've got the bank officer that was involved in the loan, and that's probably going to be the case, you can recreate that form, get the signature. That is much better than saying I don't have it. The 1919 is a little trickier because you have to have the borrower's signature on it. Now, in this case, they're saying the loan is in a workout, so I'm going to assume we still have a somewhat cooperative borrower. The thing you want to do immediately is get that 1919, fill it out, get that borrower's signature on it, and you're not going to backdate it. You're going to use the current date.
Yeah.
But your chances of getting paid with that 1919 with the current signature when you send in your PDK are pretty reasonable.
And Lance, I assume if I get a borrower signature and I date it May 21st, 2015, I'm going to disclose that right up front.
Absolutely. You're going to disclose it, but the reason the 1919 is so critical, the 1919, most of your guarantor borrower eligibility questions are on that form.
Right.
So a completely missing 1919 probably is going to result in a denial. So, Bob, I've even sent in unsigned 1919s, and I didn't get a complete denial. What I did is answered all the questions, and on the signature line I wrote, borrower is uncooperative, will not sign the form.
All right.
So, I mean, I'm suggesting to you, if you have a missing 1919, and again, I can't guarantee these will work, but I can guarantee your result will be better than if you send it in without it. So, one, if you have a cooperative borrower, fill it out, get their signature, include it. If you don't have a cooperative borrower, fill it out, and on the signature line write borrower's uncooperative, will not sign, and you sign it and date it, just indicating that you attempted to get the borrower's signature.
Good advice, Lance. Tell us what's happening in week 4.
We're going to talk about the offer and compromise and how to handle lien releases. The offer and compromise is something that is not completely unusual, and we've seen more guarantors come back after the loan was liquidated and want to be released from the loan. There are some requirements that the SBA has for an offer in compromise, and there's a process you go through. And like everything else SBA has, there's a tab system that you have to complete. So I think it's a good thing to understand the process, understand how to gather the information, and to attempt to get an approval. We also talk about lien releases, and I know that all of our SBA bankers have requests for lien releases. So we clarify some of the issues with lien releases during week 4.
Great, very good. And the reading assignment?
It's going to consist of, one is the Helpful Hints Guide, and I don't know if any of you remember Dana Relier, but Dana was in Herndon. Dana and I were pretty close, and if many of you know, Dana was kind of a grouchy guy, but Dana and I got along quite swimmingly, but great guy. But he developed a Helpful Hints Guide for walking through the liquidation process, and I think it's one of the best 3-page guides that I've ever seen for liquidation. We included some offer and compromise, some of the offer and compromise section from the SOP 5057, and then the actual offer and compromise tabs.
By the way, Lance, personal characterizations of SBA employees are your responsibility and do not represent the opinion of Coleman.
Well, I was going to say, Dana would say a few choice things about me too, but we've been friends. Bob, I met Dana in 2007.
Is he still at Herndon?
He's retired. He's down in Florida now enjoying fishing and the water. But Dana and I met on a bank closing in 2007 and became friends and actually were work partners for a while.
By the way, and I apologize if we repeat ourselves. Sometimes we get confused. But I'm doing a plug. If you get a chance next time you're in the Washington, D.C. area, please go to Herndon. They'll roll out the red carpet. Vanessa will do a wonderful job. The center director, she'll take you around. You can meet people you've talked to on the phone. It's well worth your time and expense to do that.
Hey, Bob, I just wanted to throw a good job to some of the banks that are really working through this. Atlantic Coast Bank, Stearns Bank. You guys are really killing it here, doing a great job. Achieva Credit Union, Bank of North Carolina, and Waukesha Bank. Those are some of the banks that are really working through the material.
Glad you did your homework to pronounce it correctly. I did an epic fail on that the other day. Do we have any questions, gentlemen? We're clear. Hey, Lance, have a nice weekend. Everyone,
Everybody.
take care.